welcome to everydaydish.tv. This is Raw Chef Haya, and I will be showing you how to make a really delicious raw chocolate pecan crust today. This crust can be used for a cheesecake. It could be used for a pie. You can take it and turn it into delicious cookies, deep dark chocolate cookies. You can roll them into balls and eat them like little fudge balls. Anything you do with it, it's going to be amazing, as long as you like pecans and dark chocolate, which most of us love. So we're starting with our pecans and our food processor. And I do want to mention that I get most of my nuts from livingtreecommunity.com. They carry amazing, beautiful, raw, fresh, organic nuts, seeds, oils, dates, dry fruits, and foods in general. So just to let you know, these pecans come from livingtreecommunity.com. They're amazing. I'm adding those to my food processor. I also have here some raw cacao nibs, and you want to make sure they're raw. Everything about chocolate is different once it's been cooked, and raw chocolate is not only the highest source of antioxidants known thus far in nature, but is very high in minerals in general, and all of that changes once it's been cooked. Some of its most excellent properties turn into more dangerous chemicals after it's been cooked. So we're also using raw cacao powder. And lastly, we're going to add some fresh organic medjool dates. They're soft, they're sweet, they're beautiful medjool dates, and we're just going to add those right into our food processor, kind of dispersing them around. And I'm also going to add just a couple pinches of salt. Anytime you're making food in general, the salt will open up your taste buds so that the flavors can really come to life in your mouth. And especially in sweets, people might think sweet and salt, that sounds weird, but the minute you add that pinch of salt to the sweet food, it brings everything to life in your mouth, and it's just incredible in flavor. If ever, I tell people, if ever you taste your food and it's not popping and coming to life in your mouth, it's probably that it just needs another little pinch of salt. Salt is the muse for sweet, and it's the muse for chocolate especially. So if it doesn't taste quite right, just add a little pinch of salt. If you want the recipe for this, go to everydaydish.tv to find the recipe, and you'll find that there's also liquid vanilla in our crust, but we want to save that till the end. I'm not going to add any of the liquid vanilla, and the recipe for the liquid vanilla is also on everydaydish.tv. But we want to save that because if we were to add it right away, everything would bind together. And I want my pecans to break down so that it has a nice, fine, smooth texture in my mouth. There's going to be a crunch to this crust because I added cacao nibs, but in general, a pie crust or a cheesecake crust is a nice, smooth texture in your mouth. So I'm trying to maintain that texture with our nut crust. And the way I'm going to do that today is by holding off on that vanilla. So you'll notice also I become very good friends with my food processor. I bring it close to my body to start, and once I turn it on, I'm not the type to stop it all the time and use a spatula to wipe everything down. You can use that method if you don't feel comfortable being gentle but strong with your food processor, but for today I'm going to show you how I like to use my food processor. So first of all, I'm going to turn the food processor on, and you'll notice all the nuts just starting to move around, and everything is going to start to get processed. And at some point, it's going to become a darker color. The pecans are going to start to let their moisture and their fat out, and things will start to hold together a little bit more. And at that point, I want to start just rocking, gently rocking my food processor to keep that mixture moving. So let's get that started. Okay, another thing I'd like to mention when you're making this pecan crust or any crust, depending on the nut that you're using, it will release more or less moisture and fat. So when we're using pecans, they're a very fatty nut, along with macadamia nuts, walnuts. They're very fatty nuts, so it could easily get turned into a butter. Once it's turned into a butter in your food processor, it's not really possible to do a crust with it. You can do many other things. You could make milks with it. You could turn it into a caramel. You could turn it into other types of foods. But as far as our crust, we want to make sure it's not getting too broken down at first. So you're just going to keep that going, and once you see it start creating a small stripe on the bottom, you see a small stripe on the bottom where it's all starting to collect, you probably want to stop it at that point, get a spatula, and just get down there into the corner to move that, that mixture away from the edge so that it doesn't start to attract the rest of the nut mixture to butter up and come close to it. Once you've done that, you're just going to close your food processor up again and keep it going. What we want is a consistency that we can hold in our hand firmly and it will hold together. It's not quite there yet, so we're going to keep it going for just another couple moments. Let's see here. Okay, so once I notice that mixture is starting to hold together on its own, it's pretty obvious that everything is pretty well broken down. I can go in there and feel it with my hand. And at this point, I still haven't added the liquid vanilla, so I want to make sure it's not quite ready yet. It's almost ready. But at this point, just to make sure that it's almost there, I'm going to squeeze it together. It is holding together pretty firmly. I can break it apart with a clean break. It's not falling apart in my hands, but at the same time, I can crumble it up and it will fall apart if I intend that to happen. So at this point, it feels like a good time to add our liquid vanilla, and you'll notice that once I add this vanilla in there, it will really start to hold everything, pull everything together. And that's precisely why we don't use it in the beginning. And it's also a great tool for when you're working with a drier nut. If your nut is not holding together, on one hand, you could use dates to pull that crust together and hold. And at the same time, you might not want a sweet crust. I prefer my crust not to be too sweet because the filling in my pie or the filling in my cheesecake is going to be the sweet part. So if I add that vanilla, it's also going to help those nuts to come together, bind, so that I can form a nice solid crust. So we're just going to keep that going. Okay, and you could see pretty quickly how once I put that vanilla in there, the entire crust moistened up a bit more, and it's holding together beautifully. I can squeeze it with a gentle squeeze. It holds together. I can break it apart, clean break. It's not falling apart in my fingers, but I can still crumble it up a bit. When you're making your crust for a raw pie or raw dessert, part of the importance when you're making it is thinking about serving. Serving raw cakes and raw pies is a little bit different than when you're serving cooked pies or cooked cheesecakes, because in a cooked pie or cheesecake, that crust cooks up, holds together, and will easily lift right out of the pan. We're not cooking this pie. The crust isn't going to harden and hold together. It will hold together through our pressure, but it can also easily stick right into the pie pan. So we want to make sure, on one hand, it's not too sticky. It's also not too dry. If it's too dry, it will fall apart. So that's also not the ideal that we're looking for in our cheesecake or pie. But at this point, it feels perfect. The last thing I want to do is give it a taste. That's always half the fun of making food, is tasting your food and also just making sure it has that perfect flavor that we're looking for. So I'm going to give it a quick taste. Better than ever. That's absolutely fabulous. If it weren't exactly the flavor I were looking for, I would know that it's probably that extra little pinch of salt that would bring all the flavors together and really make it come to life. So now at this point, I'm going to pull out. I'm going to be using this, this mixture for a cheesecake base today. So I have my springform pan here. And in a normal baking scenario, we would be using the springform pan with the bottom lip facing up. But for raw foods, we don't want that bottom lip up. If we were to have it up, then it would be very difficult to get in there and serve that cheesecake. So for our raw food purposes, we're actually going to flip that over and use it in the opposite direction. So that bottom lip, as you can see, is going to be facing down. So we'll just take that, set it up right in our springform pan, and lock it into place. So I have my springform pan ready to go, and I'm just going to take a little bit of extra virgin coconut oil. This is just for the purpose of greasing my pan. I want to make sure that I have the easiest time in serving this pie because we're putting so much work into making it beautiful. Let's keep it that way even after we serve it. So what I'm doing is just greasing the very bottom of the pan and also the sides on the very bottom, just so that that crust will release really easily when I'm ready to open up my springform pan. Once that's all greased together, you'll just take your mixture in one hand. I like to hold the blade down with my finger in the bottom of the pan, and I'll take in the bottom of the food processor, and I'll take the pan, bring the two together, and just release the blade. Once that's done, I can carefully remove that S blade from my food processor and scrape any extra of the crust mixture that might be stuck in the bottom of the food processor body. Release that into my pan. Now at this point you just want to feel with your hands in your crust mixture if there's any lumpy parts and break those up so that you have a fine and consistent texture in your mixture. And then with a flat palm, you're going to move that mixture all along the bottom of your cheesecake pan. You can feel with the center of your palm if there is more in the middle of your pan. And I'm also going around the edge on the outside to make sure that it's all in an even line around the edge of the outside of my pan. I like all of my cheesecakes to look consistent, to taste consistent, and so I'll just take a little extra time to make sure that everything is evenly spread. Now, once that's done, it's all ready just to be gently but firmly packed in. So first off, I'm going to, using my fingertips, go around the edge of the pan and press down. I'm not using too firm of a pressure, but it has to be firm enough so that I can bring all of that crust together. I want it to hold together really nicely so when the cheesecake is cut and served, the crust will remain in a nice solid state. Once I have that nice ring around the outside, I can come into the center and just start pressing down just inside from that outer rim. Again, using a flat palm or using flat fingers. I'm just making sure that everything is even. I don't want to feel any mountains or any valleys, and if I do feel areas where it's thicker, where the crust is thicker than other areas, I'll just gently maneuver that crust where it needs to go so that I do have a nice even base on my cheesecake. And I'm just, as I turn the cheesecake pan, working my way right into the center and pressing that last bit down. And now I'll take a look. Is there any areas that are higher, any areas that are lower? Do I have a pretty even base for my cheesecake? It feels like I do, and we're ready to go. That is your cheesecake crust. It can also be used for a pie crust or, like I said, cookies, or anything that your creative mind can think of. Thank you for joining us at everydaydish.tv. I'm Chef Haya. You can find out more about me by going to thelivingvision.com.